take up this whole section called divine qualities and the importance of qualities in our life. And incidentally, there's another chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, and the entire chapter is about qualities. So, which is the 16th chapter. So what we will do is we'll combine 16th chapter with this 12th chapter and talk about contrasting qualities, because in the 16th chapter, Krishna spends a lot of time talking about qualities that are actually self-destructive as well as harmful for the world at large. So we'll combine that and just talk about qualities and destructive qualities and also the divine qualities and how to manifest or how to cultivate these qualities. And bhakti really is about the cultivation and expression of these beautiful qualities. So that was sort of our idea. So there's a little bit of back and forth. Yeah. I hope that is going to be.
Let me share. First, we are sharing the 12th chapter, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 12. Okay. So this chapter is titled Devotional Service, and Krishna is going to describe why devotional service to him is the best in his opinion, and how one can get to the platform of pure devotional service step by step. And then the result of the devotional service is those wonderful qualities that develop. So that is discussed in the last part of this chapter.
It's kind of like the fruit
of devotional service.
service.
So Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? So important question, because it is very confusing to perceive or think of the Supreme as a person, and it's much more easier to kind of perceive with our conditioned mind and senses, to perceive of the Supreme as an impersonal Brahman.
And actually, if you think about it, like even with science and so many aspects, we see that people are at least able to conceive of this unifying consciousness, or the supreme consciousness that seems to pervade everything, right? So Arjuna's question is most pertinent, because if we think about it, in the world, most knowledge, most spiritual knowledge, even most knowledge that is concerning the nature of the absolute truth, actually seems to revolve around this impersonal understanding of the absolute truth, right? So so this question is especially pertinent in today's times.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, those who fix their mind from my personal form and are always engaged in worshipping me with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be most perfect.
So as we talked about these two paths, and this is a a discussion that it's kind of interesting that in the world there's a lot of discussion between atheism and theism, but in the Vedic context, the discussion has always been between the path of personalism and the path of impersonalism. And of course, the Vedas, they do talk about the impersonal aspect of the Supreme Absolute Truth. And we talked about that. If you remember the analogy of the sun and the analogy of the train. I think if you remember, we talked about how if someone just sees the big light, then they would automatically think that the train is just one big light, right? And yet there is more to the train. There is a engine and there are coaches. And then, of course, if the train comes to a halt, you can see that there is activity, there's life in there, there are people there. So, but at the same time, different people have different preferences. And so Krishna is saying that, yes, people who fix their mind on my personal form, I consider to be most perfect.
And at the same time, he's not completely rejecting the impersonal path, because that also comes from him. So he's saying they are perfect, but a person who worships me with great and transcendental faith, he is most perfect. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engaged in the welfare of all at last achieve me. So he kind of giving hope that yes, even a person who's walking on the impersonal path, and when he's approaching the Supreme, along with controlling the senses, always engaged in the welfare of all, then they will at last achieve me by then ultimately developing attraction for Krishna's personal form.
There's a very famous verse that we discussed, Bahunam Janmanam Ante, where it says that after many, many births, a person who is in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes. Such a person is very rare. So that's what Krishna is saying here, that even a person who's following this unmanifested, impersonal aspect of the Supreme will also attain him. But and then he defines or describes where is the hitch.
Yeah, the impersonal path, the many problems there is, one is that you're on your own pretty much, and there is no reciprocation from Krishna, because you are treating Krishna as impersonal. So Krishna kind of hides behind the curtain and say, okay, you want to do it on your own with the power of your mind and senses, so go for it. And there is also great danger of falling down from that path, because one has not established that personal connection. So the senses and the mind can deviate you very quickly at any point.
So in the next text 5, he's saying, for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. So we can see, like in the world, there are different kinds of meditation practices, and some of them entail just emptying the mind, or just going in a state of complete silence,
or looking at a point on the wall or a lamp.
Well, I actually tried doing that. Like, when I was in college, I would close the door and I would just put a candle and just keep looking at it. It's just really troublesome. And so even though these processes are recommended, in Prabhupada, in the purport, he says that there are 2 classes of transcendentalists. So the impersonalists are also called transcendentalists, but it's a process that is beset with difficulty. It's dry. The other example that is used is, it's like chewing on a very dry stalk of like a
sugar cane.
No, yeah, not a sugar cane, but just like a wood. Like it's dry, like a wooden. Like you can have a sugar cane, which is also like wooden in texture, but when you chew on it, it's just all sweetness.
Because there is no rasa in this impersonal path. You have to deliberately kick out all the rasa and taste from the impersonal path.
Right, because in the impersonal path, you don't ascribe any variety. So right from the very beginning, the process actually starts by neti or negation. So you have to, the first thing one has to do is say that not this, not this,
and rejecting all kind of even happiness, spiritual happiness or enjoyment.
And even material happiness,
yeah.
Right? So all kinds of happiness have to be given up, and that's the prerequisite. So that's why Krishna is saying that advancement is very, very troublesome. But then
text 6, and then yeah, you can go then.
But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me, and being devoted to me without deviation, engaged in devotional service, and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. So now Krishna is describing here that, so there is an easier path, and bhakti is that easier path, where just by thinking about Krishna, by devoting oneself to Krishna, so we have to eat, we have to work, we have to, whatever we are doing. So Prabhupada would give this example that if we consider all our activities to be like many, many, many zeros, then it's a very simple process of just adding the 1, right? So Prabhupada said that you don't have to change anything. If you're an artist, you do your art for Krishna. If you're a scientist, you work for Krishna. So whatever we are, wherever we are, just by adding this change or transforming our consciousness, one can actually very quickly attain the highest platform of spiritual perfection. And one of the, the joy of bhakti is considered to be unlimitedly more than the joy that one gets from this Brahman realization. So just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you will live in me always without a doubt. So we do have a mind, we do have a heart, and just by fixing the mind on Krishna, who is also known as the supreme magnet, right? The word Krishna means the all-attractive person. So because he's a magnet, and if once we start fixing our mind, then he attracts our heart. He steals our heart, actually. And so it becomes very, very easy for us to always be in that state of samadhi, right? Because that's the goal of all the yoga practices.
And this text 8 actually describes the highest state of bhakti, where one's mind, consciousness, heart is always completely fixed on Krishna. So this is the most advanced stage. And so the Krishna will say, if you can't do this, because then one may say, I can't fix my mind on Krishna all the time. So Krishna, do you have an alternative? So Krishna gives the alternative.
So that we will talk about tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, so that we can continue with our presentation. Right?
Yeah. So you go to 16 now?
Or? So let's see what we should do now. So our presentation is on quality. So yeah.
So maybe we can just go into presentation then.
Yeah, let's do that now.
So
if you guys have any questions on this topic, personalism and impersonalism, I think we should just take that because we won't be covering this again. And for those of you who may have more questions, or you can go back and watch our videos, because we have our videos uploaded on YouTube, and we've spent a lot of time talking about these topics. But we'll still like to, see if you guys have any questions before we proceed.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Based on the verses that you just showed me, which was actually news for me. I mean, I guess I knew it, but I had forgotten that basically my understanding of what we just read is that if someone is really committed to pursuing the impersonalist path, Krishna is saying that it's not absolutely wrong to do that. It's just not the easiest path. So with that in mind, if a Krishna conscious person meets someone who is pursuing some sort of impersonalist path, what should be the nature of the discussion? Because it's not like the person is doing something absolutely wrong necessarily. It's just that they may be doing things the hard way. That seems to be the message that I got from that verse.
Well, there are two, so impersonalism, just like bhakti, right, is one could be doing bhakti, but then there's pure bhakti, right? So in the same way, impersonalism is also like that yes, impersonalism in itself, Krishna is saying that if someone pursues the path of impersonalism, then one can come to me eventually, but it's a difficult path. But what we see is like a whole spectrum of impersonalism, which is nowhere close to the original ideas of impersonalism that are delineated in the Upanishads. They're sort of like a mishmash. And the goal of impersonalism, that was one of the things that our bhakti teachers spent a lot of time actually trying to eradicate. And if you think about Prabhupada's, pranam mantra that we chant, it's basically to remove voidism and impersonalism in the world. And the reason for that is that impersonalism has kind of taken on this sort of this mood where people think that I am God, and that I am, Jesus, or I am Buddha, and I am Shiva, so this whole aspect of wanting to proclaim oneself as God, and that you are God, and if you just meditate for some time, then you can also become God, is actually very far removed from the original ideas of impersonalism.
And a lot of people actually, as you can see, to properly practice the path of impersonalism requires a lot of discipline, austerity, renunciation of the world, deep study, and then the person can actually make progress. But nowadays what you see is people have become like kind of armchair philosophers in the name of impersonalism. So they are engaged in all kinds of sense gratification, but just it has become like more like an intellectual aggrandizement, where people are just, oh, okay, I am Brahman, or I'm this and I am that.
Yeah.
And that's actually not really practicing the path of impersonalism.
It's just like, bhakti can also take on this sort of like a distorted, kind of an, a form. So same way with impersonalism, the path of impersonalism entails, and I think we talked about this before, it entails that one has to quit home. One cannot be in the, in a householder condition. One has to go off and just engage in very intensive study of the Upanishads. They have to study Sanskrit. They have to basically go through this process of not this, not this, not this, and then trying to find the essence. It's a very, very difficult path to tread upon. So what we see is just sort of like a very watered down mishmash of different ideas. And so it's not really pure impersonalism.
But one thing that you asked in your question, that what can we discuss with them? Well, the impersonalists, they also believe in the soul, that the soul is separate from the body. So that is the common ground on which we can have a conversation with an impersonalist, that the difference between body and soul and the nature of the self. A lot can be spoken about that. The other thing that can be discussed with an impersonalist, as Krishna is saying, that engaged in the welfare of all. So that is another topic that can be discussed, is how we can work together to engage in the welfare of all, or transfer this transcendental knowledge to everybody.
Yeah, I was also thinking that, we always try to build bridges. And even if a person is on, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he met, they're called Mayavadis. So they're sort of the specific strain of impersonalism where they believe that everyone is God. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu met them, then he treated them with great respect. And just by his being very humble and very non-confrontational, he was able to win their hearts, and they were completely amazed. And the same thing, he actually spoke to this great teacher called Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya in Jagannath Puri, who was the teacher of the impersonalist all over India. And when he saw Lord Chaitanya, he said, "Oh, you need to learn about Vedanta." And so Lord Chaitanya said, "All right." So for 7 days, Lord Chaitanya just sat there, and Sarvabhauma just spoke non-stop. And Lord Chaitanya just sat there like just completely quiet. And finally, Sarvabhauma asked him that, you haven't spoken a word, why don't you reflect? Just like we say, right? What have you understood? And so then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya about how his understanding was not complete, and that how it was flawed. And he was actually, so in that way, Sarvabhauma actually completely undergoes a total transformation. The path of, there are lots and lots of examples of impersonalists. Like even the person who speaks the Srimad Bhagavatam was an impersonalist in the beginning, right? But his heart was immediately attracted when he came across, the beautiful verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. So an impersonalist is not he's not opposed to the idea of personalism. It's just that he has a different taste. He's not attracted. So when he finds that opening, he's immediately drawn.
But a Mayavadi is very opposed to the idea of a personal God. That's the difference between Mayavadi and impersonalists.
So Mataji, path of bhakti is Dvaita philosophy, is it? If I'm trying to understand.
Path of bhakti is beyond Dvaita, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have like Advaita, and then we have Vishishta Advaita. I don't even know the whole cycle. Dvaita, Advaita, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Chintya Bheda Tattva. So it basically supersedes all those other philosophies. It's beyond Dvaita. Dvaita just means that the supreme and the individual soul, they're different. They are Dvaita, which means they are separate.
They're separate. So Achintya Bheda is the philosophy which combines both the idea of personalism and impersonalism. It's actually taking the best, which is that there is qualitative oneness and there is quantitative difference. So qualitatively, we are the same as God, but quantitatively, we are tiny and God is infinite. So that is the understanding as according to this process of bhakti.
Thank you.
So Eric, does that address, what you were trying to, I guess, talk about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would just make two comments. One would be that I think there are some forms of impersonalism that may not be acceptable to bhakti practitioners. Like, for example, if you really dig into what Buddhists believe, that it's really quite different. I mean, they don't believe in a soul, basically. So obviously there's going to be points of disagreement there. So that's one point that I was just going to bring up. And then the second point is that I totally agree with you that pretty much no matter where you look, when you see a person who claims to be following a particular faith or practice, and then you take a look at what they actually believe and how they practice, it's usually quite different. And so I guess you just kind of have to deal with people where they are. That so many people are influenced by the materialist philosophy that dominates our culture, that you can't really get away from that no matter what people claim to be believing, it seems to me.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole Mayavad philosophy is actually completely flawed, and just like what you described about this process of not believing in a soul is actually called the voidist philosophy. which means
okay.
yeah, that is not impersonalism technically, that's voidist. So these discussions are part of the whole, Vedic, discussions. And of course, we know that Lord Buddha is considered to be an incarnation of Krishna. However, there's a whole history behind why, Krishna speaks all these different philosophies. He himself comes as Buddha and speaks this voidist philosophy. He comes and he propagates the impersonal philosophy. So there's a lot there. But at the end of the day, Krishna says that, hey, this is a very, very difficult process, and it's ultimately not satisfying to the soul and to Krishna. Nobody likes impersonalism. That's our nature. We want personalism. That's the reason why, even though we are together in Zoom and we are right now, doing all this social distancing, but none of us, we are all feeling the need for personal connection, right? And so it's the nature of the soul to desire love and to want to offer love and service. And so that aspect is not taken care of in the impersonal understanding. And that's why it's not satisfying. And so that's why Krishna allows living entities who want to relate to him in that impersonal way. But ultimately he says, hey, I'm a person, and I want to relate with you as a person also. But at the same time, he doesn't force that. So he says, all right, you can approach me impersonally if that's how you want to approach me. So any other thought? Others we can jump into. Okay, so we'll just get into our presentation. All right, so this is our discussion, like I said, chapter 12 and chapter 16. Tomorrow we'll continue with chapter 12, and then we'll also read the verses from chapter 16 tomorrow. But basically, chapter 16 talks about divine and demoniac qualities. And this is actually an aspect of personalism that we are all, we all want to experience rasa, right? And what is rasa? Rasa means a special taste. That's our desire. And that's why we watch movies, and that's why we connect with people, and that's why we like to come together and have a good meal together, because everything has rasa. So, however, in our times right now, Krishna is speaking about qualities that seem to, like in this whole chapter, the divine and the demoniac qualities, Krishna is speaking about people who have forgotten, their original relationship. They've forgotten how to tap into this rasa that can actually satisfy themselves and can also satisfy all the living entities around them, and ultimately also satisfy God or Krishna. And so as a result, when that relationship, we'll have to just mute them. When that relationship is obstructed, then what happens as a result? So we talked about this principle also, that love, when it gets perverted, right? Then what it becomes is a form of lust. It becomes, and from that lust comes all of these different qualities which are not satisfying to the soul, and they're demoniac. When we use the word demoniac, it means that it doesn't satisfy the person. It creates great destruction for the world, and ultimately it is not pleasing to Krishna as well. So first we'll talk about some of these demoniac kind of qualities. And before we talk about this, it's very kind of interesting that in the previous ages, it was described that, especially in Satya Yuga, that, there would be planets where, the divine personalities would stay, who are called the demigods. And then there would be the demoniac people who would have their own planets. And that's how, they lived in different realms. And then the next yuga arrived, where people actually, the demons and the demigods, they would be both in the same planet, right? And then the third yuga, which is the Dwapar Yuga, came, and we see that in Krishna's pastimes, where both the divine and the demoniac were in the same family. So when Arjuna fights with Duryodhana, they're both part of the same family, and they represent completely opposite qualities. And then in Kali Yuga, it is described that both the divine and the demoniac actually reside right within us. So when Krishna is speaking about these demoniac qualities, he's not speaking about the other. He's actually speaking about our own heart and our own struggles with all these lower qualities that we have to overcome in order to attain the divine quality. So this we watched, but we'll still go ahead and watch this, because actually I do think that we need to read some of the verses. Otherwise you won't get the context for what we are trying to share. Just give me a minute. So this is this chapter, the divine and the demoniac qualities, where Krishna first starts out by talking about the divine qualities. So he says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity, simplicity, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, and freedom from envy and from the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, O son of Bharata, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. So he's talking about the qualities that a person who has divine nature has. And then he's talking about the qualities of those that are in a different mode. So pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance, these qualities belong to those of demoniac nature, O son of Pritha. The transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demoniac qualities make for bondage. Do not worry, O son of Pandu, for you are born with the divine qualities. So this is again another very significant point, that the reason why these qualities are not desirable is because they act as great impediments to the process of liberation and finally the attainment of Krishna. O son of Pritha, in this world there are two kinds of created beings. One is called the divine and the other demoniac. I have already explained to you at length the divine qualities. Now hear from me about the demoniac. Those who are demoniac do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness nor proper behavior nor truth is found in them. They say that this world is unreal, with no foundation, no God in control. They say it is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Following such conclusions, the demoniac, who are lost to themselves and who have no intelligence, engage in unbeneficial, horrible works meant to destroy the world. Taking shelter of insatiable lust and absorbed in the conceit of pride and false prestige, the demoniac, thus illusioned, are always sworn to unclean work, attracted by the impermanent. They believe that to gratify the senses is the prime necessity of human civilization. Thus, until the end of life, their anxiety is immeasurable. Bound by a network of hundreds of thousands of desires and absorbed in lust and anger, they secure money by illegal means for sense gratification. The demoniac think, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future, more and more. He is my enemy, and I have killed him, and my other enemies will also be killed. I am the Lord of everything. I am the enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man, surrounded by aristocratic relatives. There is none so powerful and happy as I am. I shall perform sacrifices. I shall give some charity, and thus I shall rejoice. In this way, such persons are deluded by ignorance. So it goes on. So I just wanted to give you a little context. So this is, so we'll just watch a few videos and then we'll talk some more. So this we've already watched about man's relationship. So all these horrible works that are meant to destroy the world, all in the name of greed and sense gratification, right? Just the act of cutting all the forest. There are some shocking statistics about how many forests are cut every day. Since we've already watched it, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the idea being that, you know, this insatiable lust for enjoyment and this exploitation of nature, of animals, of all the resources, just to make our ends meet. It's called ugra karma. Ugra karma means just karma that is just so passionate in nature and leads to so much of destruction and turmoil. So I'm just going to skip this and come back to this. Just give me a minute. So this is actually a movie that was, I don't know when it was released. It's called The Wolves of Wall Street. It was based on a real person called Jordan Belfort. And, you know, the movie basically talks about this guy. We can watch this and then we can talk. And this is what Krishna is saying, that so much wealth do I have today, and a person is willing to break any rules, and morality is twisted just so that one can meet one's, fulfill one's desire for greed. So this is this person.
He is the money making, drug taking, car crashing, Wolf of Wall Street. Jordan Belfort, the man made famous, if not infamous, on the big screen by Leonardo DiCaprio.
I have been a rich man and I have been a poor man, and I chose rich.
What kind of money were you making?
$1 million a week, about?
He began his climb up the finance food chain as a stockbroker in the 1980s, from penny stocks to multi-million-dollar deals.
I'm a born salesman. I have an ability naturally, from the first time I ever opened up my mouth to try to sell, the words came out perfectly.
Eventually running his own firm, Stratton Oakmont, the cash fell like rain. But soon he admits his appetites exceeded his income.
Voracious appetite to spend money, which I no longer have at all. As much as I could.
You spent on what?
Sex, drugs, rock and roll. I mean, you know, houses, cars, boats, dinners, wine, champagne. I don't even like champagne.
Leading the life of stereotypical 80s Wall Street exes. Think Gordon Gekko.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
But with wilder parties.
Well, I think it's about money first, but certainly about sex and drugs. It was an alternative universe.
For instance,
people having sex under their desks in coat closets. I mean, everyone just drugs line the pockets of all the broke. There was hookers in the basement.
Belfort says his meteoric rise to the rich and shameless was headed for a crash landing, but he was too stoned to notice or even care.
What was your drug of choice?
Quaaludes to start, and then cocaine, and then everything after that. And I won't blame the mistakes I made on drugs. I would say that the drugs quieted down my guilt and remorse.
He didn't so much hit rock bottom. The rock hit him. In 1998, he was indicted for securities fraud and money laundering. The government says his firm defrauded investors out of more than $200 million.
I smuggled money to Switzerland, and the Swiss banker, he got arrested here, and he gave everybody up, and I was one of them.
He would end up serving 22 months in prison.
How much money are we talking about?
Question. I don't know. I mean,
Now, the federal government says it was about $110 million.
Yeah.
And his list of victims is long.
Everybody.
More than 1,500 people. On that list, Bob Sharon, who says he lost $250,000.
First investment, I think, was $11,000. I made a couple of thousand on it. The next one, I made $1,500.
So it goes on, of course, the idea being that this greed, and Krishna says that there are three doors to hell, or a suffering, an existence of suffering, and one of them is this insatiable greed, which takes us to this place. So, and then let's go back. The other thing that Krishna says in this section is where he says that people say that there is no God, that there is no foundation to this whole existence, that everything is a product of sex desire, right? So let's go back. It was kind of startling for me when I saw this video of how close this is to what we are about to hear. They say that this world is unreal, with no foundation, no God in control. They say it's produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. And so let's see what he has to say here. So so what happens when we think that because this is a discussion that comes up often, is that do we really need a reference point in order to develop these qualities? Can a world where there is no absolute morality, can we really talk about morality? What is moral? And so on and so forth. And what is the purpose of life? Just like we discussed yesterday in our discussion on time, that what is the best use of our time? And we have this time, and we looked at all these verses from Bhagavatam where it says that just by engaging in work that is meant to give us some fruits in this world, is that really the best use? And of course, the Bhagavatam says, what's the point, right? So even with values, as long as we are caught up with this material energy of Krishna, which is constantly not satisfying us, then as a result, what happens is that that lack of dissatisfaction within the heart generates a lot of fear, it generates a lot of insecurity within us, it generates anger. Krishna describes that in the Bhagavad-Gita, how unmet expectation leads to anger. And this anger becomes a cause of destruction, because when you have that anger, then one is constantly in a state of bewildered consciousness. One doesn't have clarity. And we see that right now, young children, the shootings in schools, for example, it's a result of a culture or a society that is promoting consumerism and materialism to the point where people are experiencing this vast emptiness within the heart. And as a result, then we resort to things that are self-destructive, and sometimes we resort to things that are actually destructive for the society. So this is actually this person, Tom Bloch, and he's talking about teaching values in schools. So
I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said to teach a child in mind, but not in morals, is to create a menace to society. So I think today our job in our schools is not just to make kids smart, but to make them good people. And there are so many corrosive aspects in our society that it becomes more important now than ever to make sure that our young people receive character education. So, and I think this is particularly true when in many areas where parents are not so involved.
It goes on, he continues this conversation further, but the idea being that this is such a great responsibility. If we want a better tomorrow, if we want our world, our earth to be protected, then it's the greatest investment is actually the investment in our next generation, so they can grow up with these values that can help them, first of all, be satisfied, be content, with oneself, and then feel that connection with the Supreme Lord, see everything in relationship to this divine source, and be able to use everything for the welfare of everyone and for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Without that, our mentality very easily becomes one of exploitation. And it's very difficult when we think that this is the only life we have. And, so then in that case, why should we not eat, drink, and have as much fun as we can in this lifetime? At the expense of whatever it takes, right? So we'll just watch one more and then I'll open it up for discussion. So here is another TED Talk by David Brooks, who talks about virtue. So it's natural now that we understand that, yeah, we do need some values. Stephen Covey also talks about principle-centered life and how we need some guiding principles, guiding values that can help us, because I look at my own life and I think if I did not have this GPS, then it's very difficult sometimes to navigate and see, okay, is this right or is this wrong? Because the world of morality can be very confusing sometimes, right? So, when we understand what real virtue is, what real qualities are, I remember back a long, long time ago when I first started exploring spiritual life, I have a friend who came to see me and she asked me some very pointed questions about why. And she was talking about one particular thing. And she said, why is this wrong? And I didn't have an answer because, from her perspective, I could see that as long as you're not harming anyone, what's wrong with that? So when we just see these values, so right now, the way we analyze values in this world is at two different levels. One is just purely moral values. This is bad, this is good, right? And then what happens, it creates a lot of argument and confusion, and people say, well, but what's really wrong with it? And so morality becomes a very sort of a relative thing, and there is no real consensus on it. And then the other kind of virtues that are being talked about quite a bit are qualities. They're called, I think, intellectual virtues, which means that those qualities that can actually help us, be able to attain our goals and attain knowledge or whatever it is that we want to attain, which are, like cooperation and respect and things of that nature. So let's watch this person and then we'll continue.
So I've been thinking about the difference between resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the ones you put on your resume, which are the skills you bring to the marketplace. The eulogy virtues are the ones that get mentioned in the eulogy, which are deeper. Who are you are in your depth? What is the nature of your relationships? Are you bold, loving, dependable, consistency? And most of us, including me, would say that the eulogy virtues are the more important of the virtues. But at least in my case, are they the ones that I think about the most? And the answer is no. So I've been thinking about that problem. And a thinker who's helped me think about it is a guy named Joseph Soloveitchik, who's a rabbi who wrote a book called The Lonely Man of Faith in 1965. Soloveitchik said there are two sides of our natures, which he called Adam 1 and Adam 2. Adam 1 is the worldly, ambitious, external side of our nature. He wants to build, create companies, create innovation. Adam 2 is the humble side of our nature. Adam 2, not only to do good, but to be good, to live in a way internally that honors God, creation, and our possibilities. Adam 1 wants to conquer the world. Adam 2 wants to hear a calling and obey the word.
So again, just wanted to, bring out this idea of how there are all these different qualities out there, some certain qualities, certain values that can help us thrive in this world. And yet there are qualities that Krishna is speaking about, and he will be speaking more about this in the 12th chapter that we will go into. Oh yeah, I think we should end with this. I think this will be a good place for us to end so that we can continue. This is really good. This is what I was talking about, this idea of intellectual virtue and moral virtue, right? So let's watch this and then.
So a common way of thinking about intellectual virtues, and in fact your big 5 virtues, are virtues that are necessary for the quest for knowledge. And Aquinas has a different kind of intellectual virtue, which is the state of mind, a kind of perfection of mind that you achieve when you reach your goal. If philosophizing can be thought of as a kind of intellectual fitness program, then these sort of big 5 virtues like intellectual curiosity or intellectual courage and humility, these are the kinds of virtues that you need in order to stick with your exercise regimen and perform your workouts well. But there's also the kinds of virtues that you acquire by performing those exercises well, like health and strength and fitness. Aquinas' intellectual virtues are like that. They're the perfections you acquire through reaching your goal, or partially reaching your goal if you conduct the quest for truth well. Perhaps the highest of these, and certainly my favorite, is the virtue of wisdom. And Aquinas describes wisdom as the perfection of mind in which you're able to organize everything that you know into a coherent whole. And furthermore, to be able to see reality in light of divine truth, to sort of take the perspective of what is ultimate when putting the whole picture together. And he reflects upon the term wisdom in Latin sapientia, coming from the verb sapere, which means to taste, and particularly to taste something sweet. And he describes then wisdom as the kind of sweet taste of the fruits of your philosophical labor.
And this is where I wanted to end today.
And
it's just this idea of sapientia, which I just absolutely loved this idea when I heard this, because it means to taste. So this word wisdom actually has its root in this word sapientia. And then I was thinking about how interesting that is, because the whole process of bhakti is actually tasting the quality. So Krishna, he actually, when we engage in any activity, whether it's our chanting, whether it's cooking something and offering it to Krishna, Krishna is actually tasting our quality. And we are also tasting Krishna's qualities. And it is in this exchange of this tasting of each other's qualities that wisdom arises, right? So that's why when we are chanting, we're directly associating with Krishna. And by that association with Krishna, we start to relish, we start to experience all of Krishna's beautiful qualities, which is the source of all good qualities. And in that place, we also start imbibing these qualities. In fact, the Bhakti literatures, they describe it in very beautiful terms that Krishna actually personally starts to decorate the body of a devotee with these ornaments of good qualities. And so the source of these good qualities is no longer just for the sake of some intellectual pursuit. It's not just for the sake of some moral upkeep of society, but it's the natural manifestation of one's very deep relationship with Krishna. As we learn to know him, as we develop this love for him, then these qualities begin to naturally manifest from within, because that is the nature of this spark of pure consciousness. That little tiny spark has all the qualities of the big ocean. And so what is the big ocean? The big ocean, Krishna, is a reservoir of all good qualities. And so when we interact with him and when we associate with him, we start becoming like him, right? And we'll watch another video later where it says that we are who we associate with. And so the more we associate with Krishna, the more our qualities start to become naturally manifested. And it's a result of this tasting, which is, interestingly, the word wisdom comes from this root word, which means to taste. So I'll pause here and see if you guys have any comments. And then tomorrow, we will talk more about what these divine qualities are that Krishna is talking about. How do we develop these qualities? And yeah, and then just, continue the discussion of divine qualities.
Mataji, I would like to know what is meant by the phrase, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because personality is the word I don't understand. Is it like, I mean, obviously it's not the normal sense, like, oh, my personality is whatever, another person has a serious personality. So what is the meaning?
Yeah, it just means that Krishna has so many different personalities, and so there is, he appears in so many different forms, and out of all of those different forms in which Krishna appears, Krishna is actually the source of all those personalities. So he's the supreme personality. So Godhead has so many different aspects, just like we saw how he can also be understood in the impersonal way. He can also be understood in the Vaikuntha, like Lord Narayan, where we worship him in awe and reverence. He is worshipped in, the Bhagavatam describes that God has so many different forms, just like the ocean has countless waves. So in the same way, the Supreme Lord has unlimited forms that continuously appear, right? They're eternally present. And so out of all of those forms, or all of those different personalities, the personality of Krishna is actually considered to be the supreme and the most lovable. So that's what is meant by the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I had a question about whether the study of science would be impersonal or personal.
Well, it can be either. Anything, any kind of study, whether it's the study of science or the study of philosophy, or it all depends on our consciousness. And in fact, this was one of Prabhupada's, great, purposes, was that, his students could actually take up, even the study of science and show, because anything can be used for the glorification of Krishna. In fact, everything is meant for the glorification of Krishna. I've studied Indian classical music, and it's amazing. Or even Ayurveda, I've studied Ayurveda. Everything, when you start seeing that everything actually ultimately has a relationship with the Supreme Person, it's, we tend to divorce it from its. I was just talking to Nimai today, and he's our son, and he's always been interested in philosophy, and right now he's doing computer science, and we were just talking, and we were just saying that actually all of these sciences, they're not meant to be compartmentalized in this way. They're all connected, and yet we have sort of compartmentalized everything. So when we understand that science is also actually spiritual life or Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada would call it a science of self-realization. So this is also a science. It's a science, it's a subtler science of the self, that's all. And so there is nothing that actually prevents a devotee from being able to study science or philosophy or any other subject and just use that to glorify the Supreme Lord.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on our discussion on qualities, if you have any further thoughts. I mean, you know, when I think about the process of bhakti, I think what attracts me and excites me the most is the development of these qualities, the transformation of the heart, because it's easy for us to hide behind knowledge, to know a lot of things, to show ourselves as a great scholar. But what is the real test of our practices are these qualities that we develop, this quality of humility. How much can we tolerate, right? It is described that you can, the greatness of a person can be tested by how well they can handle a provocative situation. How do they respond to difficulties? How do they respond to, you know, when the doors are all closed and they're behind their, you know, the screens? How are they acting? Are they still acting in integrity, or are they, you know, is this only for show? So all of those things, you know, that transformation of the heart is how one knows that the process of bhakti is working, because one will see it for oneself that one's qualities of anger and lust and greed, all of these things will start to get transformed, and one will actually become a person that is dear to everyone. It is, and Krishna will speak about this later, that for such a person there is no enemy. That is another quality of a devotee, that a devotee has no enemies, and he's an enemy to no one, because there is no envy within the heart. So like that, you know, it's something that one can test it for oneself.
I think it's very difficult to develop virtuous qualities without anchoring it in God. Like if just one tries to do it out of one's own free will, out of like more mundane morality, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah. In fact, in the Bhagavatam, there is a verse that says that because those qualities are being developed on the level of the mind. So the word that is used is manorathena. Manorathena means that everything is on the level of the mind, and the mind is constantly fluctuating. And so that's why those qualities don't have a firm foundation. So one day I'm a very happy person and I'm a very loving person, but then something happens tomorrow and I just absolutely become this, you know, this nasty person. I mean, you know, we all go through that. Like we see all these different sides to us. So we want to be situated on a firmer ground, which is the spiritual ground, which is our real nature. Then there's no more fluctuation. So.
Yeah, actually, I want to add something, Mataji. No matter how much you practice, you always have somebody who's a difficult coworker or in your relationship. You know, you try to practice, but that practice really does not help you, because the situation is really difficult that, you know, you don't know how to handle such situations. Like, you know, it's just a comment I wanted to make.
That's true. That's true. And that's where, you know, once, and this is what we are going to talk about, that tomorrow or maybe day after, we'll talk about these great personalities, you know, Haridas Thakur, even Jesus Christ, you know, he's put on a cross. And, you know, there is, you know, all these great, you know, personalities, you know, what is most glorious about them is how they interact, you know, in the world, and how they respond to very, very difficult co-workers or family members or other people who are, you know, and yeah, we'll talk about this tomorrow, you know, just hang in there. It's a very nice comment though, that we are constantly dealing with difficult situations. And as we go deeper in our own practices of bhakti, then we won't be disturbed, first of all. And second, we'll know how to respond to such situations.
Mataji, I have a question. I found that even the demigods, you know, like people like Indra, and they also have this tendency to become angry and they, you know, envious. So they're supposed to be in higher planets and but still their consciousness doesn't seem to be as pure as, yeah. I mean, you would see that what we find about humans.
Yeah. So, exactly, and that goes to show that any bhakti, that is the higher planets, there are living entities, the demigods, they also have desire for material enjoyment. So wherever there is a desire for material enjoyment, the good quality cannot stay there for too long, you know, because it'll fall off. As soon as one's own motivation or one's own self-interest is in any way challenged, then those good qualities, they get thrown off the window. Krishna speaks about that, right? Lust. From contemplation of the objects of senses, then lust develops. And from lust, there is anger. And if it gets fulfilled, then greed happens. If it doesn't get fulfilled, it becomes anger. So that's why, as long as there is even a trace of lust within our heart, we will find that we will not be able to be on this platform. But bhakti transforms our lust and brings it to the level of love. So so that's why we see these things in the heavenly planets. Yes, Shringar or Pavan Sarovar Prabhu, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, I have this question. Like, we have all these, demons of our mind or our demonic qualities, and we are trying hard to get rid of them. But eventually we realize that our own endeavors can only do so much, and we eventually need Krishna's mercy to be able to get rid of any bad qualities. So how do we attract Krishna's mercy?
Such a nice question. These are all stuff we'll be talking more, but I guess just in short, just by our sincere, so two answers. One is the very process. So the very process of bhakti means that we are in fire, so just like when you take gold and you put it in fire, then naturally what happens is that the impurities within that gold, they start to get burnt away, right? So that is the process. So the process of chanting, the process of being in touch with the spiritual sound vibration. I remember very early on in my spiritual life, I asked a very similar question to a devotee who I had a close relationship with me. I said, Prabhu, how do I develop these qualities? And he had this bead bag in his hand, and he said, everything is in your bead bag. And he pointed to my chanting beads, and so by taking up the practices of bhakti very, very sincerely, trying to, always, not just do it in terms of the quantity, but actually adding quality to our practices will help us overcome. Because what we are talking about is, if you remember, when we talked about this bhakti creeper, this bhakti tree, this is the stage, it's the longest stage in bhakti. It's called the anartha nivritti stage, which means the stage where there is a purification of the heart or a cleansing of the heart that takes place. And all the unwanted impurities, they start to actually be removed from our heart. But the way you actually go through the anartha nivritti is by actually chanting at the stage of clearing. I'm sorry, I'm using a lot of technical words here, but chanting can be done at many different levels. So when we chant at the level of attention, that is called Nam Abhas. Nam Abhas chanting means it's a clearing stage, which means that all the impurities within the heart will automatically start to go away from our heart just by the power of the chanting of the names of God. So that's one. And the second is that even if we are struggling with some qualities, then when we actually call out, when we cry and we pray, then automatically Krishna then responds. Like I said, Krishna actually decorates the body of a devotee by these beautiful qualities. And so we have to put ourselves in the fire of this process of Krishna consciousness. And the third way of actually developing these qualities is by associating with those people who have those qualities, or appreciating those people who have those qualities. So finding people who have those qualities that we would like to develop, and then either thinking about them, appreciating them, and meditating on them. It's very powerful. And one will see that one will actually start imbibing those qualities within oneself. So there is a whole, there's a whole process, and the stories over how people have come and been completely transformed by this process. So it works, but it's not overnight. It's not instant. It just takes a little bit of time. But one has to desire, and one has to simply desire and try. That's all. There are two people who have raised. I hope that helps. Bhakti Lata, go ahead, and also Shringar, if you guys have further comments. I'm not sure if.
Hi, Krishna.
Yes, Bhakti Lata.
Yeah. So I was thinking, about this anartha nivritti. Sometimes I feel like until Krishna is trying to teach us, or imbibe us with these qualities through not freely, not a free, one day I wake up, I have those, but he presents some life situations different ways, and through that he is trying to teach. Theoretically I understand, but then I fail to make the connection, okay, some situation Krishna, what are you trying to teach me? Just let me learn everything, whatever. So but sometimes I really don't get it, what is it that he wants me to learn? How do we
Yeah, and that's where, the association of other devotees, taking guidance, praying, and sometimes we just have to go through what we are going through and do the best we can. And sometimes we look back and then we realize, oh, this is what you were trying to teach me through this, So one has to sometimes just practice patience and just continue on and do the best one can. But yes, the process of bhakti, this is where the rubber meets the road. We can talk about, philosophy and lofty topics, but this is where it really becomes real, is when we can actually live that life and we can act on that platform. And it's not easy, but that's what is the challenge of bhakti, or the path of any spiritual life, is can we really forgive? Can we really tolerate? Can we really accept, right? Can we really be humble? So those qualities we try, but at the same time, we also realize that it's a process and Krishna will give it to us. If we simply just, try, that's all. So, and we have to be also kind. Yeah. We also have to be kind to ourselves and know that, one will not develop all of this overnight. So I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, okay, I got a call from Lokadaksha. Shashi Prabhu, do you have anything? And then we'll end. So nice to have
you. Anything. Thank you, Mataji.
We miss your questions, Shashi Prabhu.
Yeah, I mean, I've been MIA for almost 2 weeks now. Work has been really hectic.
Oh, really? Yeah, we need,
yeah, I mean,
we need your work to be hectic.
I do have a question, but I'll ask tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you so much, Delia, Dominic, Eric, all of you, Tarun, Anshulanchita. So good to have all of you here, and we'll continue this tomorrow.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Sorry that Lokadaksha was not here today. He is not feeling so great, but yeah. Okay.
Hare Krishna, thank you.